Okay, ladies and gentlemen, dear friends, dear colleagues, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Andris Sprūds. I am director of Latvian Institute of International Affairs. I am also professor at Riga Stradiņš University. Today I have again a pleasure to welcome all of you coming, participating, being present in person in a public debate on, I think, extremely important issue for Latvia, for the Baltic states, for Europe. Of course, it's about Belarus. So this is urgent issue. We discuss it. It has a public resonance in our society. We can remember that actually Mr. Lukashenko was invited to Riga. He was supposed to be in Riga in the beginning of April. COVID made some modifications to his visit, perhaps good. Later on, he walks with a gun around, and we see extreme violence in Minsk. So we see the processes which of course, invite us to think about our own experience in the process of democratization. It also causes us to think about strategic interaction with Belarus, because Belarus is important for the Baltic states in terms of strategic location, in terms of being an economic partner. Sovereignty, independence of Belarus is also having direct implications for, of course, security of the Baltic states as well, and not only for the Baltic states, but for Europe. Today we have a debate with, I think, a very interesting panel, at least at the beginning, of 2 speakers, but then we will have 3 speakers. But before I introduce the speakers, I would also like to add that this debate, today's debate, is part of the wider Riga Dialogue process. We had a good debate on a Zoom, on a virtual conference with regional and beyond partners, experts, and decision makers on EU-Russia, West-Russia relationship, on Euro-Atlantic security developments, also on Belarus. But now I think more specifically we would focus on the Belarusian developments and on West-Russia interaction in the context of Belarusian developments. And before I open the floor, I am happy to give the floor to one of the partners, extremely instrumental and important partners, Friedrich Ebert Stiftung, the head of the Friedrich Ebert Stiftung here in the Baltics, Per Krumrī. Per, the floor is yours, but before I also give the floor to Per, I must say that there is a good partnership with Friedrich Ebert Stiftung, with European Leadership Network, with Nuclear Threat Initiative, with Russian International Affairs Council as well. So as I said, this is a part of the wider process of debate, of dialogue, which is not always easy. And we have our own disagreements, but the dialogue is important. I think it also reflects and manifests the confidence in willingness to engage. But please, Per, the floor is yours also to add some of your insights.
Thank you, Andris. Don't be afraid, I will be very brief because I know you're not here for listening to me. But Andris has already mentioned it, this is part of a bigger project. And when we were actually thinking of what can be the public spin-off of this Riga Dialogue 2020, it became pretty obvious for us, it has to be Belarus. We are all monitoring the situation since the protest of the Belarusian people started just a few weeks ago. And the Baltic states have been incredibly fast out with a clear position on the proceedings in Belarus. And with this, based on values and based on the principle of self-determination, you have been taking over the leadership role in the European Union, and it's also much appreciated not only in my country, Germany, but also in a European context. And I think it's important to mention here that you have some credibility here, not only because it's your close neighboring region, but also because from history you know exactly what kind of story the Belarusian people are in right now. And as I said, it is definitely your neighboring region, but it's also a neighboring region of Russia. So I think it is instrumental to have this discussion today. I'm really much looking forward to it. And as I said in the beginning, I will be very brief. Thank you very much for being here. Thank you for the speakers to give us the opportunity to listen to you. And I hand over to you, Andris. Thanks.
Thank you, Per. And we can move forward with our debate. And I'm happy to introduce 2 speakers which are present today. It's Viljar Veebel, who is a fellow at the Baltic Defense College, and Viljar has contributed to different assessments with regard to different developments already for some time. So the partner and friend of ours already for long, and we are happy that still Baltic bubble allows you to arrive to Riga. Then Arkady Moshes as well, a good friend of ours. We discussed that we already read the book by Arkady, which was produced 22 years ago. So we have a indirect, very long communication. And also, of course, Arkady is a director of the program at the Finnish Institute of International Affairs, the research program, which devotes attention exactly to EU, Eastern Partnership, Eastern neighbors, and Russia. So I think we have excellent tandem of speakers here directly involved or can be involved with the public in person. And then we very much hope that Victoria Panova from Moscow will join us. She had a bit emergency landing, but everything is fine, and she might be joining us quite soon. And she is also vice rector of Far Eastern Federal University in Vladivostok. So from Moscow to Vladivostok and Vladivostok back to Moscow. So that's why I think the Russian perspective would be, or perspective from Russia would be also very valuable. So we are waiting also for Victoria to join us. Let's start. Let's start with a first question, sort of on a assessment of the situation in Belarus. What it is? What is Belarusian summer? What is Belarusian August? What it is about, how you would define it. Viljar, let's start from the Baltic, sort of more closer perspectives, then we go to Finland, and then hopefully we go to Moscow as well.
So I think we should have been debating it a year or two ago here, what will happen. And actually we were debating it, we were debating those questions in our lectures because it was visible that it will happen during 5 years anyway. And what I can say from the official reaction, what I can see from the rest of Europe, not the Baltics, but from the rest of Europe, is that we are being caught napping again. Not napping in terms of that we understand that that we need to support politically opposition, or we should contribute in this process, but in that terms that we are not able to offer them alternative package to Russian alternative, which will come soon if we don't push enough. The Western, let's call it Western approach, has been that this is a Belarusian fight. So the locals have to do it themselves. They need to liberate themselves, and we just support them, but we don't put our skin in. And we haven't put it too much skin in, but what we need to understand is that we are killing a huge parasite inside the body. And this parasite is so big that it needs to be replaced by something quickly, not for the body to collapse. I am meaning the economic system of Belarus and the social system which needs those factories and the industry to function at least half a year to allow people to have a normal life until they correct the political system. And it means that you need, if you take the representatives of this huge centralized parasite away, no matter what you do with them, somebody has to rule the ministries, somebody has to rule the factories, somebody has to keep the system running. And for that, we need at least 500 people to be assisting Belarusian people who have competence how to negotiate with West, how to receive what West has to offer. It looks to me that this support team is not ready to fly when they are needed. It looks to me that this support team has not been selected yet. And that will push Belarusian people to the choice where they were in a way, not they, but where the Ukrainians were while redeciding a couple times, or where the Georgians have been. Because if you don't see the European plane landing with the help what you need, those people who say that the Moscow planes come very quickly gain support. we have had 2 lectures about how quickly you need to be prepared or how much longer in advance you need to be prepared. In my opinion, we are not prepared. To say the other side, Lukashenko, in my opinion, is in between Yanukovych and Gaddafi at the moment, and so he can end up in Rublyovka or in cemetery. So he's trying to buy the time. Maybe the third option will come. So just there seems to be no option. Maybe there is a Jaruzelski option for him, if he can negotiate with someone who can give him immunity. But just to finalize where they are, it's both sides are buying time with a very huge cost of Ukrainian society and economy. Sorry, Belarusian. So basically, it's more than they delay. The usual normal people will pay for that with their life and with their ability to have a normal life. So the sanctions is a political act. It is partially useful, but I think the positive alternative, the peaceful package, is what we need to tell them. If you commit, we will help. And we need to show that what are we about to contribute if they commit, because they are taking a lot of risks and they understand it themselves.
Okay, thank you. Arkady, please. What's happening in Belarus from your perspective?
Thank you, Andris, and let me thank the organizers for the invitation. I'm proud to say that I'm certainly among those who was not caught napping. Last June, together with a colleague of mine, we published a paper under the title Belarusian Paradox, a country of today versus a president of the past. It's a short paper. It's 6 pages or 7. You can read it. It's basically the analysis of what brought to the events that are unfolding in front of our eyes. Lukashenko still believes he runs the peasant country which elected him president in '94. But this is not the case, because the country has developed a lot in terms of the interest to its culture, language, and roots, the changes of attitudes towards the market economy, general opening, general education of the population. There's a lots of figures that tell you that this is really an amazing development. And he overslept it. He was caught napping because his instinct started to fail him. And throughout the campaign, he was making, so the answer is a combination of 2 things: structural, that he is too archaic for the country, and the actual mistakes which he made during the campaign, of which I will mention only 3. One was his attitude to COVID. A totally insulting attitudes to people who were falling ill. Total neglect to the problem that ran against Belarusian cultural conventions. He had his reasons why he didn't want to close the economy. But anyway, this was not what was expected from him as a paternalistic ruler. He was supposed to take care of human lives, and he refused. Second, it's his attitude to females, to women. He let Madame Tikhanovskaya run because he was absolutely certain that in the society which he was imagining for himself, a woman would have no chance to be elected. Otherwise, he could not have registered her as a candidate. He was talking about the trio, the 3 ladies, as just girls, days before the elections. Girls not understanding anything in life, basically a quotation. But that's not what his nation thinks and how it behaves. And 3, there was a colossal mistake, which was a concentration on the Russian threat during the campaign. The point is that for the majority of the Belarusians, Russia is not a threat. So this message doesn't fly. Russia is a brotherly nation, and that's the majority of Lukashenko's electorate. So there was a cognitive dissonance among those people. Is it a threat or is it a brotherly nation? And they didn't trust him, because for 20 years they were told that this is a brotherly nation, an elder sister. And the minority of the electorate, which believes that Russia is a threat, for them Lukashenko is part of the problem and not part of the solution. He is part of the potential process that might lead to Belarus losing its sovereignty. So he made these 3 mistakes. He made more, but I don't have more time. So I will probably stop here. It's a combination of structural problems and political mistakes. And then, of course, what happened in the immediate aftermath, the excessive use of violence, which he obviously didn't expect, the scale of the protest, and was not ready for. The excessive use of violence, that's what energized the protest. Without that, maybe we would have had a different situation. But my last point is that you were talking about scenarios. I wouldn't be that optimistic. Unfortunately, I'm afraid that for now, he will stay in power. What's going to happen sometime, maybe some years down the road, I don't know, because the structural problem will not disappear. But for now, he's seizing the initiative, and I would even say gaining the lead. But that's an intriguing proposition. We can discuss it later.
Arkady, excellent. So you don't have time for now, I should add, but certainly you will still have time to elaborate and to add some additional thoughts. Can Victoria hear us? Can we add Victoria to our debate? Okay, so we continue with our panel and we still wait, and I think there will still be a chance if Victoria joins us. Viljar, but coming back sort of to scenarios, and already you touched upon them and Arkady touched upon them, and there was a little bit of disagreement. So what happens to Mr. Lukashenko in one year's time? So what's after 1 year? What would be the situation in Belarus? Of course, I know that it's always difficult to predict, but so what are those developments the most likely, according to your assessment?
So when we go back to the...
Because of course in the Baltic countries, I think there was a lot of hope that really changes are happening, that we see finally democratization of Belarus. So how is it in a year's time?
So now we have to admit that if the balance stays how it is at the moment for a while, that the sides see that no quick solution or whatever end of for one of the sides will happen, then we also have to put not only the Russians into the game, but unfortunately Chinese. If you look, for example, Belarusian military industry, if you look at the last parade where Lukashenko had a very nice speech, more than 1/3 of things what were presented in the parade had Chinese parts on them. So it looks China has, the most visible is the Polonez rocket system, which can fire 300 kilometers. So it's, and it has the Chinese rockets in it. So if you now imagine that China is about just to lose this technology or to be given to West to examine, we can hardly believe that they just walk away. As we can hardly believe that the Russians just walk away with all their investments. So most probably both are pushing as much as it's possible to do invisibly, to get at least stabilization or in one moment to collect their technology and disappear if they really are about to go away. Now is the question, are the Russian companies or Russian interest and the Chinese interest about to go away? Or they are about to push more impact in there? The second problem, what happens now is, I think you all have seen the movie Death of Stalin. When Beria has his final meeting, and there is what comes out, the paradox or dilemma that for Khrushchev, when he says that if we will not kill him, he will kill us. And this is, I think, what both sides, at least Lukashenko has admitted it openly, that he believes that the only option for him to survive like Beria is to kill all the others. Because if the others survive, he has no way to survive. And this is the dark scenario, if he really believes in that. So now again, the question is, are we about to find a way out for him? Because for him, we can find a way out. He's not Putin who needs to go to another galaxy. But Lukashenko can be sent to Sorbonne or somewhere as an example of dictator for the students. So this is now again for us to assist, let's call it that way. The clock is ticking. As I said, every day costs huge amount of money for the Belarusian people, for the system to be stable, for the military technologies not to be smuggled out, for the dirty money not to go to us. And for the Baltic, I think why we should really hurry is that in a defense and military aspect, Belarus needs to be controlled before you can do something strategic against the Baltic states from Russian side. So if Belarus stays, we also increase our security a lot. So that's the moment. And my proposal is for the Baltic nations, like with the bubble, don't wait for slow Europe. Start to collect your assets, what you can deliver yourself. There is no need to ask Brussels for that. We have the capabilities, we have the experts, and our interest is by far bigger than it is from Cyprus or Portugal.
Okay, Viljar, thank you. And I see that Arkady is shaking a bit his head, I believe, with a different perspective.
I very much like to be mistaken on this prediction. But first of all, I think that 1 year is a slightly inappropriate term, because theoretically he either goes now or stays for a somewhat longer period, 2-3 years, maybe even longer. First of all, let's look at the situation now, why I think he can stay. I believe in peaceful protest, but I don't believe in leaderless protest. And I believe in peaceful protest that is growing. That's not what we see. If people keep coming every Sunday and then keep going home every Sunday evening or Monday morning, that's not going to affect his behavior, just the way as protests in Khabarovsk are not affecting Putin's behavior. If you have 100,000 today, you need to have 500,000 next Sunday. Then when a peaceful protest makes a difference. We don't see that. We don't see the rise. And if he has the inauguration in October, whenever he chooses to have the inauguration, it will be even more difficult, because then it will be even more difficult. Second, we don't see the strikes. The export enterprises of Belarus keep working. It was confirmed yesterday that all the cargo that was supposed to go through Lithuania goes through Lithuania. I think the situation is here. So the hard currency keeps coming to the country the way it used to be coming to the country. So there are no strikes. 3, Russian support, information, diplomatic, economic, guaranteed, and it's going to be guaranteed for as long as it is necessary, because Russia believes it's at war with the West over Belarus, and when you are at war, you don't calculate your expenses as carefully as in peacetime. And the power, that's what Putin promised. Whether he's going to keep that promise, it's another matter, but the readiness has been declared. The message has been sent. And 4, EU is toothless or teethless. They are considering all sorts of responses, and as we read this morning, citing the position of Cyprus, might continue doing so for a long time yet. So it's not surprising that he is actually gambling and raising the assertiveness. He is sending the leaders, expelling them, evicting and expelling them out of the country or putting them to jail, not the other way around. He is awarding 300 of his Tonton Makuts with medals, and they all accept, none refuses. They will fight up until the bitter end, and so will he. He is not between Yanukovych and Gaddafi. If Yanukovych behaved the way Lukashenko behaves now, probably he would not have left. And let's not forget, the EU was negotiating the extension of his stay in power. He made a deal about the next elections in September when he was leaving, when he was fleeing the country in February. Just a minor footnote. So if he stays now, he stays for a longer period. One scenario then will be that this structural problem will grow, as it has been growing. You had minor protests in 2010, no protests in 2015, significant but only economic protests in 2017, and now we're having what we're having. So if the trend continues, then 2-3 years from now, you can theoretically expect a much larger wave of protests against him. As a result of that one, either he might have to leave, or Russia might think that something needs to be done differently. Russia cannot do things differently now, because this is personalized system. If it could replace Lukashenko now, it would have replaced him long time ago, because he's of course not ideal from Moscow's point of view. The problem is that you cannot take him out of the system and put Mr. X there. Why? Because these people are handpicked and loyal to Lukashenko personally. If there is no Lukashenko, they start infighting and lose control over the situation. And then you might have protests and free elections and you name what. So Moscow will tread very carefully and time after time maybe sticking to him. And again, I have to do self-advertising. You can find my column on Forbes.ru, published 3 days before the elections, where I argued that after the elections, when I couldn't predict the size and the scale of the protest, that Moscow would be supporting him and giving him all the money that he needs. So, but potentially, yes, I mean, it might start considering what would need to be done. So the good scenario is he goes or he's replaced, but there is also a bad scenario if he stays. The bad scenario is that Belarus becoming Venezuela, poor and losing population. We are not talking about protests in Venezuela, which have been going on for more than a year. But Maduro is still in power. What else happened throughout this 18 or 20 months? 10% of the population left. So when you cannot get the guy out of the garden, you live out of the garden yourself. And that's not good for Belarus, and that's not good for the neighbors of Belarus. But this is not impossible. This is a bad scenario, but we have to start thinking about that scenario as well. So I wouldn't be absolutely that optimistic as many people are who like talking about the leaderless protest and all that.
Arkady, but if I may immediately sort of a little bit changing the sequence of the discussion and responses on international implications, because of course also one of the angles of today's discussion is to focus a bit on international repercussions. On partly already you did it, Viljar and Arkady, in your already very valuable, interesting insights. What about international repercussions? What about Belarus internationally? What happens to it? Belarus has been a relatively peaceful place. If you look among 6 Eastern Partnership countries, the only country which didn't have any territorial frozen conflicts on its territory, it's Belarus. What about Belarus right now, or what about Belarus in the next months? Could it become some kind of hot space or frozen conflict area? What would be the developments? How you see internationally? Or it would be still more domestic politics with some soft, mild intervention and influence from outside? Arkady, please.
No, I don't think that this is a plausible scenario. Nobody is really interested in escalation. For different reasons, the protesters want to stay peaceful. Because if they can't stay peaceful, they will be crushed. And it will be all over the news that they smashed a window, burned a car, and that's why they will have been crushed. Lukashenko is not necessarily interested in escalating. He can talk, he can send troops to Grodno, but I mean, it's a different ball game. He's not interested to escalate according to my analysis because he's winning now. He doesn't need the escalation. If he keeps doing what he's doing, he will most likely win, unfortunately. Russia is not particularly in a hurry to escalate because, again, Russia might still care about certain things. Using force in Belarus, I argue, will not be popular inside Russia. It's not Ukraine. You cannot sell it to the Russian public. You cannot explain that you had to use troops in Belarus to help Lukashenko, when these are really people who are viewed as your closest kins, as your brothers speaking the same language, and people who even now are not waving EU or NATO flags. So why the force would need to be used by the Russians? It's actually interesting. The pro-Kremlin pollster CIOM in January last year published a public opinion poll according to which 48% of Russians said that they wanted Russia and Belarus to remain just good neighborly nations. And then the percentage of Russians who wanted Belarus to be part of Russia was only 17%. Interestingly enough, because I tend to follow these things, for a year and a half there was no similar poll up until a fully similar poll appeared yesterday. And this new poll shows you the same picture. Okay, it's 43% now who want Belarus to be a friendly neighbor as opposed to 48. But if you also put them together with those who want Russia and Belarus to be equal in the union state, you basically arrive to the same figure, slightly bigger than 2/3 of the populations. And the same 17% want Belarus to enter Russia. So, and when the newspapers are now writing that kind of the new loan to Lukashenko, which is being discussed, is going to cost every Russian 6,000 rubles. Not too much, but still money. I mean, it's not viewed extremely positively inside the country. So Kremlin will be also careful to will be treading carefully, and so will be the West. So I think peace will be preserved. Stability, it's another matter. As I said, in my prediction, the process of the gap growing between the leadership, the regime, and the people, it will continue yawning.
Thank you, Arkady. Viljar, so you mentioned also China actually, but I think still the EU and especially Russia are the major players in the whole situation. So what are the scenarios and what is Russia's sort of goals according again to your assessment? Please.
Yes, so if we think that this smaller parasite can survive with the help of Russia, also being corrupted in many ways, the trouble is that Russia, as mentioned here, has less and less money each morning. It's wherever we look, maybe it's only in rubles the same nominal, but now the ruble is not as strong as it used to be. Economic outlook starts to be impacted because of sanctions against the technologies. So it also impacting military technology. You don't have certain components, so you cannot make fighters or tanks what you would like to sell. But Moscow still has raw resources. At the moment, they cost not sufficient at the moment like oil and gas, even for Moscow itself. So what can happen, of course, is that while Lukashenko has industry which can produce something for export, so it is possible that Moscow is delivering oil and gas, and Lukashenko is somehow surviving with that, producing Belaruses and mass vehicles just to keep the system running. But I can't see the situation being better than a year or two ago, and I can't see this system even being stabilized for long term like that. Yes, there is like two injured guys or sanctioned guys are helping each other, but summarized resources are under pressure because of the energy prices in world market, because of the sanctions which still have some impact, and eventually, so my prediction is, yes, it might take some time, but it's from stress they start to go to depression quite soon, understanding what Russia also understands today, that even for the military cost you have less and less each year, because you have to pay your salaries to the workers in the factories, you have to pay the pensions if you want to survive, you already have riots, it all costs money. It's not fast enough for the local people. I cannot say about the EU, but it looks to me, unfortunately, that some people say that, okay, if it goes slowly down, then we accept it, at least no refugees, at least nobody is killed, so eventually in 10 years, what Arkady might be saying, in 10 years it will collapse, so at least it's after my presidency or it's after my appointment if something happens, so let's stay away. And unfortunately, somebody has to pay if it collapses quickly or if there will be quick solution. And we know if it's not Moscow who pays for rebuilding the country, it must be Berlin. There's not too many other options in that game. And Frau Merkel seems not to be that big fan of supporting the countries where we have had already this rose revolutions and initiatives. So I think there is a lot of confusion, and as you said, people are thinking the whole week if they should go again to the in weekend to put their salary under risk. But in my opinion, the salary will have less purchase power anyway. So the pressure will grow. Now the question is how it will end up in a system which is having different cultural traditions as Venezuela. So yes, the pressure might be similar, but the traditions, how you react, have been different. And coming back again, I think we should start work about the packages, what we can offer them, and we should communicate with them because you win the support of society when you really have some kind of damage control and exit for them.
Okay, Viljar, thanks. Arkady, please.
Yeah, I mean, here is exactly the point, that you're thinking in terms of 10 years. Lukashenko doesn't need to think in terms of 10 years. There is a good British expression that when at war, you can lose every battle except the last one. So this is the logic. You have to win now. You have to buy yourself time for now. It's the Russian logic as well. What's going to happen 10 years from now, whether you will be technologically advanced or not, this is not necessarily your headache. And this is, I think, what the thinking is. Over time, the Belarusian economic situation has been worsening, of course. It's not sustainable. All these enterprises need to be subsidized. The debt has been growing. Getting the debt refinanced was more and more difficult every year. All this is true. But the thing is that Russian policy up until recently was the policy of kind of minimizing subsidies while keeping the same level of geopolitical loyalty of Belarus. But now the risk is that the loyalty might no longer be guaranteed, so you need to invest more. And whether Russia can or cannot use the money, this is of course a debatable question. It depends on whom you talk to. And it's not that I am ready to risk my money, but I will still for that. But I will nevertheless remind you that Russian gold and currency reserves now are significantly bigger than they were in the beginning of the year. It started the year with some 530 billion, now it's 600 billion, because it went out of dollar, which has weakened, and bought gold, which is now much more appreciated than in the beginning of the year. It can certainly find this couple of billions of dollars for Belarus. In the middle of between 2005 and 15, of course, there was different Russia. The level of Russian subsidies paid to Belarus was about $9 billion a year. It was exactly $100 billion within 11 years. That was found to be too expensive, so Russia started to change its policy. But still, the range is quite huge, and Russians can spend money on foreign policy projects. And if this money is taken from its own citizens, fine, because it doesn't matter what citizens feel. I mean, they don't, because the leader of Russia is not elected at elections, just as the leader of Belarus was not supposed to be elected at elections. And it's exactly because of this is now an ideological question, that the question who runs the country should not be in the Russian sphere of influence, should not be decided on the elections or as a result of protest. That's why Russia will be now much more willing to invest money into the Belarusian project, even if being fully aware that in the long run this project is economically non-sustainable.
Very short comment, please.
Yes, so maybe we should pressurize a bit more Belarus, and then Russia needs to pay more, and we can also get Russia to knees quicker. Because we had this problem that the sanctions are not working fast enough, so let's tease them to the game.
But what does it mean to the knees? What are the implications for the West-Russia relations? How the Belarus plays into the West-Russia relations? Any role? Or it doesn't change the logic of Western-Russian interaction?
The answer is again very sad. The West has never been willing to go into clinch with Russia over Belarus, unlike the question of Ukraine, for a number of reasons. But for basically since independence, Belarus has been kind of allocated to be part of the Russian sphere of influence. And there were different arguments used to kind of sustain that political position. Not always the fear of Russia, but also sometimes the willingness of the Belarusians to be together with Russians was cited. What we are seeing now is basically a replay of Yalta. When Madam Merkel or President Macron need to discuss the Belarusian question, they call Putin. They don't understand how that looks. They call Putin. There is an instrumental reason for that, because as we understand, Lukashenko doesn't want to receive and doesn't want to talk to them. So maybe they have to. Maybe it's not their choice. But this is going to stay in the history of diplomacy, that in middle of August, when the Belarusian crisis emerged on the European agenda, the first thing which the European leaders do was to call Putin. If it's not Yalta, then I don't know what Yalta is.
Viljar?
Yes, because the question is also about the vision of the Belarus role in a European society or economy. So let's imagine they succeed with a change of regime. But this economy only has meaning with the current setup where there are sanctions against Russia, where Russia has trouble to sell certain resources out and get money. They are just converted in Belarus to something else. When Russia has problem to buy something, then the caviar first goes to, or the shrimps go to Belarus, and then they go to Russia. So I think the locals have experienced more than a decade this role of transit from both ways. And if you ask them, are you now about to give it up and start to be like finding some other niche capability? But it will take years, if not decades, for this economy to find something else, because production of Belarus tractors is not possible or even rational if you don't get subsidies from Russia. So you basically have to close down 90% of these factories because there is no innovation, there is no science behind that. If you want to sell them to European market, you have to obey all these patents and legal circumstances which you cannot. So let's imagine some Belarusian people are in this room at the moment. What is the role of Belarusian economy if part of European family instead of partnering with Russia?
But in this case, and again, I would say this is the last question before we already go to the public. EU, European countries, toothless. We see toothlessness, as Arkady, you mentioned. There is element of Yalta. Basically, Belarusian economy is connected to Russian economy. Do we have any leverage? Do we have any advantage? What should Europe do?
Unfortunately, we have to go 5 years back. We have to undo what Europe has been doing in the last 5 years. Europe has been re-engaging with Lukashenko at the expense of the re-engagement with the civil society. EU, I've been arguing it ever since. As Andris knows, I've been against the unconditional lifting of the sanctions in 2015. EU lost reputation inside Belarus because in 2010, people were waving EU flags when they were protesting. In 2020, they don't do it because they no longer believe Europe is a source of hope. They no longer believe Europe is a source of help. And they no longer believe Europe is actually on their side. Because for 5 years, Europe has been re-engaging with the regime. In 2015, EU says the political prisoners were released. This is not true. Some were released, not many, and most served their term in full. And yes, they were released after that. They were not rehabilitated. They remain convicted criminals according to the Belarusian law and legally cannot participate in politics. If I were running the EU policy in 2015, I would have never agreed to that. People who became political immigrants after they served their term in Belarus as a result of elections of 2010 still live in Poland or elsewhere. They still could not return to Belarus. EU swallowed all that. In 2017, during the wave of powerful socio-economic protests, Madam Mogherini expressed concerns, of course, and then forgot about the whole thing. Those protests were also put down in a brutal way. Not as now, of course. We're not talking about thousands of beaten and raped people. We're talking about just hundreds fined. But this was very far from the EU expectations concerning the internal evolution of the regime. The EU swallowed that. After 2017, well, this is something which I don't know because this is kind of, I'm repeating other people's words, but the representatives of the human rights community were telling me that the Belarusian police was training in prisons on the inmates to be prepared to all this brutality. I can't believe that the same representatives of the human rights community were not telling this to the EU ambassadors and the EU diplomats. If they were not, okay, I apologize, but I'm afraid they did. But it's just that the EU wanted to believe in the dialogue. You cannot train the police to the level of brutality that we've seen in August if it had not been trained before, in such an organized way and in such a brutal way. So EU lost credibility and reputation inside Belarus. EU lost credibility and reputation as a normative and norm-based player, because if it were, and if it had a norm-based foreign policy, it would behave differently now. But it has not become a geopolitically motivated player, because again, if it were a geopolitically motivated player, it would have a different policy now. But this is something which I genuinely do not expect. The Commission may call itself a geopolitical commission, but this is not necessarily EU tasks. EU, unfortunately, is an economic club with limited police functions. It's not particularly successful. That's why what it says is ignored by Moscow, it's ignored by Minsk, it's ignored by Ankara, it's ignored by many others, because EU too often proceeds from expressing concerns directly to expressing regrets. The middle part is absent. But what can we do about that? This is just a reality. I mean, if I were EU now, if I were to advise the EU, I would start from restoring the reputation. That means delegitimizing regime. That means that if there is no dialogue, maybe recalling ambassadors. That means definitely demanding, and by saying demanding, I mean demanding, not just using the word demanding, the release of hundreds of political prisoners, which are still there. Investigation of concerning those people who have been involved into what is by international standards a crime, and series of crimes. So this would need to be done immediately, right away, and only if that is successful, it would be able to reach out to the people of Belarus and then receive also the right maybe to speak on behalf of the people of Belarus. And I agree with everything that was said here before about the need to prepare for what's going to come next. It's still going to come. 3 years or 5 years from now, you will have a poor, impoverished country facing the need to conduct reforms for which it will not have money. People will need to be helped to go through the hardship. Nobody in Belarus deserves the level of the 90s of Russia and the 90s in Ukraine. And we are not talking about the normal IMF packages of $1, $2, $3 billion. We are talking the amount of money, at least a level of magnitude bigger than that. Because otherwise, you will not be able to conduct successful economic reforms in Belarus. And if you're not able to conduct successful economic reforms in Belarus, all the effort will be in vain, because then again, in a step, you will get a repetition and people will start asking, where is our benevolent dictator? Thank you.
Viljar, if I may, a little bit even complicate your task. What the Balts should do, what the Baltic countries should do within European Union, in what kind of direction both should lead or try to influence EU?
Maybe I start from grassroots level. It's I've seen more Ferraris with Belarusian number in Estonia than with Estonian numbers. And I think this is a fair place to start. I've asked about this from our civil servants and they just laugh. How come Belarusian Ferraris have this state, how to say, they are in Estonia, they have money. We're not questioning where did this money come, is it laundered or not, why they are in Estonia, and so on. It's just example. Like we were quite ignorant about Danske Bank affairs when it was running, at the moment we are as ignorant about Belarusians. If you go to certain places in Estonia, you can see a lot of rich Belarusians, not anymore, but before the riot started. You could have seen them, and by asking, are they the private entrepreneurs, or they are just the chinovnik from a Lukashenko regime being awarded very kindly. So we have allowing them to have all the European lifestyle, all the security, even to bring their Ferrari to Estonia. Why? And the same applies, you can't get to Estonia without being in Latvia, I think, from Belarus. So, so that's first, go to the personal level and really start to ask questions from people who seem as supporters of regime and who should not be enjoying here the life. The second is now what was touched, admitting the complete failure of European neighbourhood policy. So something what was designed for many things didn't work for anything at all. What I have been telling for years is, instead of trying to be everywhere with a very small amount of people and money, really have the priorities set. If there is a moment to change in Minsk, then focus to Minsk instead of just doing this carpet bombing with small money everywhere around countries which is with bigger number than European member states. So Europe should start to learn how to focus for the moments when you can make change and to have the resources ready instead of saying that, okay, we have to put it to the next year budget, we have to negotiate it, then Parliament will not approve the budget. Maybe somewhere in May we can have money for Belarusian projects. The same is in the countries. We have trying to have different projects to support political reforms, not only in Belarus but also in Moldova when the moment was there. Institutional inertia is so strong. So it has been said, you know, if Europe is about to support them, why are we telling that there is a problem in Belarus? We haven't got any projects to go and support the people who need their support. And they know as well that, I must say, if I see something, then I see US and UK actually being there in certain other reasons, but I really don't see the EU being there. So we have been ignorant. We don't have the toolbox. And unfortunately, it's not being fixed in next 1 or 2 years because ENP is not about to meet what is needed in Belarus at the moment.
Viljar and Arkady, I am still tempted to ask the question, because isn't it the case that EU has not been within Belarus? Because, of course, there is a policy of some compromises with Lukashenko, absolutely, which is sometimes seem to be toothless. But at the same time, actually, the Belarusian people are among the highest Schengen visa receivers in the world, if not the top one. And actually, it means that in the process of engagement with EU, many Belarusians have visited Lithuania and Poland and have seen different lifestyle. And actually, you might argue that there are no European flags, but there are experiences of Europe in their minds.
Well, first of all, this is why they are protesting. I mean, the learning process has been going on. Second, I mean, my argument is slightly different. They were the #1 receivers of the Schengen visas also before the reset of relations with Lukashenko. I mean, I don't remember the figures by heart, but as far as I can tell, they were receiving the highest per capita number of visas also before. My argument is that the way the re-engagement with Lukashenko was done in 2015 was a mistake. And there has to be a lot of explanation done. I heard a lot of explanation in 2015 why the policy had to be changed then. The argument that the sanctions policy, which was of course not the sanctions policy, had not worked. I'm not hearing any explanations now why the policy of the sun warmth towards Lukashenko has not worked. This is my point. This is what you need to explain to the people of Belarus, saying we took a decision to re-engage with Lukashenko for geopolitical grounds, for whatever grounds, because we wanted to travel the path of least resistance. I mean, there might be explanations. It was a wrong choice, wrong decision. People of Belarus, we apologize before you. You, the families of victims. You people beaten in the jails. We understand, we are not like totally guilty, of course. The decision, the responsibility lies with the regime which gave these orders. But we realize now that by re-engaging, rather than by demanding the reforms, internal liberalization and market reforms, we made the regime somewhat stronger and more likely to rely on the brutal police measures again, just as it did in 2010. We did not learn our lessons in 2010. In 2010, we kind of were, by that time, I mean, by 2014, EU had 20 years of experience of dealing with Lukashenko. 20 years of cyclical relationship, 3 huge rounds of sanctions. So for how long you can be using this carousel? I actually offered a bet to one colleague that 2 years from now there will be another reset with Lukashenko, because if it happened 3 times, why cannot it happen for the 4th?
Okay, on this note, I am opening the debate. I think it's extremely interesting conversation, but let's also involve public, please. Questions, comments. President, please, your insights as well.
So thank you very much for very vivid and very data-based discussion. I really liked it. I agree on the reasons why all these protests started. Absolutely right. Arrogance, and that's all. But today we all have the situation, wait and see. Let's wait and see. European Union because of other reasons, Russia because of other reasons, Lukashenko just buying time. And I agree at present Lukashenko wins. He changed the tactics. He has targeted arrests of the leaders in a situation when you have a protests without leaders, as we all said. Okay, the leaders come again and again, but they targeted, arrested the possible leaders with not too much violence. He changed the tactics. And now about Russia, Russia is implementing what's called creeping annexation of invisible annexation of Belarus. Why I'm talking about that? When Lukashenko announced that, thank you very much, Russian friends, for your assist in our media, you replaced the journalists who left. That was a signal that there are many people introduced in the security services of Belarus too. And if until this conflict, Lukashenko really took care, very carefully, to build a borderline, or let's say even a border fence between Belarusian army, Belarusian secret services, Russian secret services, and always after a collective exercises, made a careful analysis and made some changes. Now, the price he's paying for staying in power, he let the Russian experts to move into Belarusian secret services, army, and what was announced publicly, the press. So it will not be visible, but Russia will undertake Belarus in a very, I would say, peaceful way. But it's not 100% sure, and then I agree that we are not prepared. We don't have, European Union don't have any plan how to react in a day X if something happens in the wrong way. We are too slow. We are too slow in these peaceful, let's say, protests. We will be super slow if there will be something much more dangerous. What we have to do, I'll just recall the Georgian crisis. There was no, let's say, round of consultations around the European Union about what to do. Polish President Kaczynski just picked up some Baltic leaders, landed in Azerbaijan, arrived in Tbilisi, and of course, six hours later, Sarkozy arrived from Beijing Olympic Games because he wanted to save his face as a French presidency of European Union. So what the Baltics should do, we should really act together, and we should not wait until the consensus of European Union. Of course, it's not popular view, but we should really not only say, let's talk about what to do, but let's say, we are going to act, and please, European Union, support our actions. We have to be prepared. Otherwise, we'll be surprised, and we will wake up in a new Europe, which was not so nice as it is now.
Thank you, President. So, excellent insights, but we can continue with additional comments or questions. Please. I'm just standing up even to see you better. Rico?
Veiko Sprūds, associate of the Institute of International Affairs. My question is, actually I have two questions. The first one, Viljar, from your presentation about the Chinese connection, from what you are reading, what you are doing analysis, do you see Russia in any way willing to really go against the Chinese interests, or they would go alone? So this is one question. And the second question is to Arkady. If we look on this many possibilities as you outlined, first question is, do you see in any way the wish you presented that EU would apologize? Do you see in 100% scale what is the percentage that EU would actually do such change of policy, apologize, and try to really put its geopolitical game into the game? And the second question is, in next 3 to 5 years, which will run according to the scenario as you said, do you see actually a situation getting worse for the neighboring countries, namely Poland, Lithuania, and Latvia? Because from one point there will be worsening economic situation. Worsening economic situation in Belarus would mean outflow of the best minds of Belarus, particularly IT sector and other bright students. So when they could land in a neighboring countries, do you see such possibility in your analysis as well? Thank you.
Yes, I would grab also Arkady's question for one sentence. I think Europe will not apologize because those people of long time ago, you know, those were the bad Baroness Ashton and Jean-Claude Juncker and the others we don't want to remember anymore. We have now a new administration. So that is the trouble. Somebody talked about that we are learning, or Arkady was asking why we are not learning. We are not saving any knowledge. We are not accumulating any knowledge. We just rotate all the time and new leaders who don't have this knowledge about Belarus or even Russia. So we are endlessly doomed to repeat the same mistakes after each 4 years because it's the system which produces the rotation. Now coming to the Russian-Chinese, I think the negotiations already have started, let's call them negotiations, and the Russians with services mentioned here have entered some buildings which the Chinese were considering their own. I think Russia has upper hand in Belarus, but lower hand in the big picture, and it's very complicated for them. You know, this Russian bear is really small compared to this panda, which is growing very fast, and it will matter in other fields. So it's China is very unified, and you cannot go against them in one place and expect that they will be happy with you in other deal. So most probably Russia tries to trade with Chinese about allowing them to keep something or leave without leaving technology behind. But what we have seen so far, this technological cooperation has been going on for many years because the products are ready. Are they prototypes or not, it doesn't matter. It must have been more than 5 years they are trying to put this Polonaise system together. And they have it ready for the market. So I think both sides understand the need for the trading without inviting Lukashenko to those talks because he has very little to do with that.
I couldn't agree more on your statement about the lack of institutional memory. No, I don't expect the EU to apologize. Unfortunately, I expect representatives of the EU to continue maintaining the position that the dialogue has been useful. They've been doing it in the last months. I want to know then how exactly it was useful. But that's the next question which I'm not allowed to ask. On your question about the brain drain from Belarus, yeah, it's possible. I don't know how much IT. I'm not so much fascinated with the talk about the Belarusian IT sector. In terms of money that it actually brings to the Belarusian economy, it's not a particularly great source of money. It has helped Belarus, and this Lukashenko said himself, and he's right on that. It has helped Belarus to somewhat change the education system in particular sectors, and that has helped. If these people leave, well, Belarus will lose, but who's going to gain? I don't really know. I don't know the specifics of this business. What I know on a somewhat broader scale about potential immigration, be it IT or be it whatever, most Belarusians that I talked to about this issue, they say the people would be eyeing Poland. Even Lithuania does not come into question or consideration, mostly because of the language issue. Because for a Belarusian to be integrated linguistically, for anybody who had Belarusian at school to be integrated into the Polish language, it takes months. And of course, with Lithuanian or Latvian, for that matter, it would take much longer period of time. But Poland, I mean, people were talking about immigration, labor-based immigration to Poland already before it all started, because they've been seeing the experience of Ukrainians, which was predominantly positive. And Ukrainians were finding jobs in Poland in probably millions. And Belarusians were thinking about that as well. It was just much more. It's an interesting thing to discuss, because why Ukrainians were traveling in millions? Because it's visa-free. Because you can come for 90 days looking for a job. Then if you find job, which you do, then you process the papers, and some work in a gray zone and travel back and then come again. And many, I mean, the Polish system, as I understand, was very easy from the bureaucratic point of view. That's why people were easily finding not only the jobs, but legal jobs in Poland. Belarusians were deprived of that opportunity. But if that changes, if the very first trip becomes easier for them, they will be leaving, I believe, en masse, especially people from the western parts of the country.
Thank you, Viljar. Thank you, Arkady. So let's have a last round of questions or comments before we wrap up.
Yeah. Artūrs Bikovs, Latvian Institute of International Affairs. I have two questions for Arkady. The first is, what is the future of the Coordination Council? And the second is, should the European Union work with the opposition? And if so, how we should work with it? Thank you.
The question. Thank you to Artūrs. Let's take some other ones. Please, the last chance. Yes, please, at the end of the call.
If I may, a brief comment. The case was made as to why the EU changed policy in 2015. Well, let's place ourselves in the context. Ukraine was in turmoil. Belarus was playing a role of mediation, so to speak, and this brought some interest from the side of the EU. So I think Ukraine is important here and wasn't mentioned too much. One of the things that is not being mentioned when referring, for example, to Ukraine is that the GDP per capita in Belarus is still double the one of Ukraine. And most Belarusians, if you look into the Belarusian mind, they don't really want to follow the Ukrainian example. It's not that they are not interested in freedom, it's not that they are not interested in democracy, they are not interested in following an example that they tend to view, rightly or wrongly, it's not for me to decide, as a dead end. And there is nothing in the evolution of Ukraine that seems to prove the contrary, at least in terms of welfare of the population and of a functioning system that has the necessary credibility. If you follow Ukrainian debates, political debates, is still much about corruption, is still much about nepotism, is still much about oligarchs, all things that Belarus doesn't seem to have, for reasons that you have abundantly explained. And but still, it's something that in the mind of many Belarusians is very much present. Question that was raised also about IT sector. This is also an interesting case, and I'm not an expert to assess how big the IT sector is in Belarus. I was trying to always understand the mystery of the IT Belarus sector. Why is it thriving? Partly it has to do with China. Let's not forget the Great Stone Project. At the beginning I thought it was a bluff, but it turns out that there is some substance into it. And the second thing, when I was trying to understand why it was thriving, they say, well, because bureaucrats don't understand, and you cannot regulate something that you cannot understand. So how much are IT entrepreneurs likely to suffer from the oppression if they can work in an environment that seems to be quite unregulated? These are a couple of points I wanted to make, and my last point is...
very shortly, please.
Yes, my last point will be very quick because it's a question. You have made the case of Belarusian opposition and Belarusian civil society that we are supposed to engage with. If I were to paraphrase Kissinger's question from the 70s about the EU, which was not called the EU then, and he said, give me the telephone number, what would that telephone number be? Thank you.
Okay, number of questions and comments still. I see Yanis, someone else? If no, someone else, so Yanis, please, last question. Then we go back to the panelists.
I was wondering if well, maybe Arkady would agree with me, but maybe our Estonian colleague may also, but it seems to me that the short takeaway from this conversation is that basically Belarus is going to go back to status quo ante. That Lukashenko will remain. He will do what's necessary without going over the top in terms of repressions, but making sure that he decapitates, and I don't mean physically, but sends out of the country people who are causing him trouble, wait things out until the folks on Sunday get tired, and everything sort of goes back to normal, as I say, status quo ante. Everybody else will be satisfied. Europe will be satisfied with that. Russia will be satisfied with that. And even maybe in Belarus, people will be satisfied. Well, at least we'll say, well, we had our chance, but it didn't work.
Please, final concluding thoughts. And of course, you can pick up the thoughts and comments you really would like to underline, so because I think it would be difficult to respond to all of the questions and comments which we heard. Please.
Yes. Maybe a new variable inside this game is maybe it would be good if the next wave of corona will come and really force economic decline to be deeper in Belarus, because if we think what is happening here, we are receiving a lot of funds from EU. We need a lot of funds from EU. Our economies are in deep trouble. So imagine what will be in Belarus when the reality hits them. So it might be that it goes in a hard way, and if corona will be denied, as it is denied, and it will have a hard impact, then it will force the economic decline to be faster, and it will save the situation. So instead of endless pain, we will have a fast pain, and it will lead to somewhere. To respond to the comment from the last row, actually that has been something like to whom to talk if you want to talk with opposition. I remember we tried around 5 or 6 or 7 years ago to educate young Belarusians in Estonian School of Diplomacy, like hoping them to give them something. But again, there were two problems. I think Lukashenko managed very well to smuggle in very loyal people to government. So my personal impression was that they all were nice pioneers with let's say, undercovered. And we really just educated them how the West works, nothing else. And after that, even they disappeared, which was our lack again. We were not consistent, and somehow we have this hope in Western societies that everything will heal itself. It is not healing itself. It is at the moment going worse before it starts to go better. So with that positive note, I give the floor to Arkady.
Thanks. Of course, you always are intellectually provocative, and I think we should be careful about wishing some other society to go through disaster, so economic disaster or health disaster. But if you look cynically, then you might, I guess, have some arguments in that vein. But Arkady, please.
I was not mentioning Ukraine exactly because of the reasons that you cited. Because they don't want to go the Ukrainian way. And that's why the elections of 2015 were the only elections which were viewed in the West as legitimate, because people voted for Lukashenko exactly out of fear that if not him, the repetition of Ukraine would come to them. I mean, they know the situation in Ukraine definitely about that. But they don't want to make a geopolitical choice. They want to stay together with Russia. But they nevertheless want to make a democratic choice. They are united by what they say in Belarusian "Sikhod," step down, what they say in Russian "Надоел," we're sick and tired of you. I mean, this is a negative thing. This is maybe a parallel would need to be found in the process that led to the toppling of the Ceausescu regime. But then we had, of course, the army and the security forces fighting on the different sides. So the parallel is also bad. But this is the thinking. It's more negative. It's not European choice. It's not geopolitical motivation. But nevertheless, it's a decent and uniting feeling, and it has to be respected. And unfortunately, the West was not up to the challenge. IT sector is suffering already now. There was a famous case, I think last week, when a gentleman who himself is out of Belarus, but had one of his company branches still in Minsk, and he became the initiator of a fund which was raising money for people who were on strike, for people who would leave police now, clearly would stay unemployed. They raised a significant amount of money. And of course, several days later, his office in Minsk was raided. And some of his close collaborators are in jail now. So that's and he was all over Russian TV, not all over, but on some Russian channels, which is really interesting because I cannot go too far in giving interpretations. But it's interesting that obviously some Russian business circles wanted to send a kind of a signal to the regime that this is not a good idea. But as I said, it grew up because it was not taxed terribly heavily. It was seen as a future milking cow rather than the modern milking cow. So it was, the sector benefited from good education in mathematics and low taxation. But that was already changing before the elections. I don't have the phone number of the opposition. But the good news is that the old opposition is disunited, split, marginalized. Unfortunately, it's been a failure. But the good news is that the new opposition is in the making now. It's being born in front of our eyes. Maria Kolesnikova was not considered to be of any of a leader 2 weeks ago. Now she is a leader, even she is not able to be a leader. She's in jail, but she's considered to be the person who is at the top. That's the normal thing in the revolutionary processes. In some places you get the field commanders, in some cases you just get the leaders. They show up, and you need to engage with them, and you need to protect them. And you need to be really tough with whoever wants to put them behind bars. Because other than that, we will be trying to answer your question until the end of our days. Where is the Belarusian opposition? It's in jail. Every time it appears, it goes to jail, so we don't have a phone number. There is a human rights community. There are serious representatives of the civil society in the field of, for instance, culture, or organizations that have been dealing with the revival of the Belarusian language. I mean, you can find people. Being just a researcher sitting in Helsinki, I don't have a phone book of these people. I know some of them, but not too many. But of course, this is why we have the diplomatic representatives in Minsk. They are not there to physically defend the door of Nobel Prize winner Svetlana Alexievich, just in case that the police might come to arrest her, because she's the last one, the last member of the coordinating council who is still free. I think it's a very commendable and even noble act that the diplomats came there, but it's also a sign of total helplessness. if you don't have diplomatic tools, if your verbal notes do not write, so you actually need to send ambassadors to stand guard by the door of a Nobel Prize laureate, that's a failure. And we have these people there, and they should they should maybe go less for the meetings with Mr. Mackay and run around Minsk a little bit more, trying to find the people who are the opposition. That's not impossible. That's not a hell much of a job. This must be doable. And if we need to send more diplomats to do that job, we should send more diplomats to do that job. I'm afraid Coordination Council is becoming history in its current form. Its presidium is either outside the country or in jail. And frankly speaking, it has failed to become an unquestionable authority even among the protesters. And I'm not trying to apply any moral judgment. It's easy for me sitting in Riga or in Helsinki to say that this went wrong or this went wrong. We cannot even imagine under the kind of pressure under which these people have been working. But objectively speaking, they refused to become a top body of protests. I can remind you about the body with the same name which existed in Russia after Russian protests in 2011, 2012. That one ended as a disaster. This one is still kind of behaving more decently, but nevertheless, I'm afraid it's becoming part of history. But to end on a positive note, I don't think that we are going to the status quo ante, because people have awakened. And that's why I said that I still would like to believe this process is not going to stop. You cannot put them back into the tube. And 2-3 years from now, there will be probably another trigger that will once again put the nation at odds with its, probably by that time, totally illegitimate leader.
Viljar, Arkady, thank you very much for, I think, this very dynamic, very interesting, very enriching conversation. Forceful, emotionally and intellectually ideas. So I think it's a very sort of good and appropriate food for thought for all of us. And we are emotionally connected to what's going on in Belarus. There was initial optimism. There was initial emotional solidarity with Belarus. I think it continues, but of course at the moment there is also quite a cautiousness about the future development, and it seems that pessimism is also part of the picture. But at the same time, as you said, as you mentioned, Arkady, there is some optimistic note to conclude. Still, there are what we see, the democratization process in Belarus are taking place. We can speak about some element of awakening. Still, we can also say that some steps can be done still by European Union as well. So it's not that it's completely toothless in its position, its activities. Of course, also optimistic note in a sense is to conclude also on a title of this the discussion on the title of the whole seminar, implications for the West and Russia. Pretty much it is not having sort of fundamentally negative implications, at least in the short term. But let's see how it develops. So I think certainly we will continue this debate. Once more, thanks to the audience for coming and participating, for raising questions. Thanks once more to partners for making all this possible. And thanks to the partners of conversation to making us think again from different angle. Thanks also to the president. So it's always very valuable to go through this exercise, intellectual exercise, but it's also a very practical exercise of discussion. Thank you so much. Let me join a round of applause.